Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
It looks like we've got enough people here. We can go ahead and get started. My name is Ed Cuttrell, and I'm happy to be hosting today Craig Smith. Craig's associated with a number of different institutes. He was actually associated with Microsoft several years ago in helping to do some work with closing the digital divide. And so he's been working in a number of different areas. He'll be talking about some of that today, I think. But he's also been a Buddhist teacher for many years. And I've known Craig for maybe a little over a year now. And Craig is working on an area called spiritual computing, and it's really an initiative to try to get together a number of different research organizations and in technology across the world to start to come together and understand a little bit about how spiritual traditions and in particular wisdom traditions from that are really quite ancient, and what they have to say to technology and vice versa, and a conversation that can be made for that in a number of different levels. And so he's here today really to talk about this, about sort of how this is forming up. It's really, I think, as you'll see from him, we're still putting things together, trying to understand what exactly this is. Thank you for coming. And Craig?
Good afternoon. I'd like to know what parts of Microsoft some of you are from, perhaps even what you might be working on. Just give me some expressions of what your interests are. Anyone want to start that out? Or perhaps what might have brought you, what link you might see between what this topic could conceivably be and what you're doing here at Microsoft? Anybody?
Pure interest.
Pure interest. What is your project here?
Visual Basic.
Visual Basic, okay. Anyone else?
Search.
Search?
A lot of people here are search people.
Yeah.
Natural language.
Natural language.
Yeah, it's natural language.
Okay. Anyone else?
I'll answer the other fork of the question. I'm from the Microsoft Home group, but the reason I'm here is a little different from that. After, 17 years in the industry, last year I decided that I'm going to become a rabbi next. So I've got another couple-ish years here while I get the rest of my prereqs in order. And then I'm going to rabbinical school. So I wanted to hear what somebody else thought about an area that I've thought about a fair amount in the last, 4 or 5 years.
Interesting. Yeah. Anyone else?
I'll tail on it. So I work on the same team as Ethan, and we look out 5 to 10 years into the future when we think about how technology may get integrated into people's lives. And so spirituality is one of those things where right now it doesn't appear to have a lot to do with technology, but as we get more and more connected, it'll be interesting to see whether or not we become more spiritual or we use it to connect more. Every society has a spiritual nature to it, and so I'm kind of curious to see how we might evolve and acknowledge that that's a part of who people are.
Yeah, good. Anyone else?
Let me add one thing to that. So I guess when I came into Microsoft, I came in saying I want to change the world, and still want to change the world, but in different ways. But one of the things which I've been talking to a lot of people about is something that you, from being from UW, would probably know more about. I like the fact that UW chose the book Mountains Beyond Mountains as a common book that everyone read.
What book?
Mountains Beyond Mountains.
Mountains Beyond Mountains?
By Tracy Kidder.
Okay.
It's about this guy called Paul Farmer, who's an anthropologist and a physician who sets up a clinic in Haiti, gets involved in international health. Now he has a $40 million Gates Foundation grant. He's done a lot of things. He's completely crazy. I'm not a fraction as crazy as he is, but I think I'm crazy, but he's like way beyond normal skills. The thing is that with technology, he's able to do a lot of change. So he's not completely abstracted from the technology. He's using medical technology and international health technology to change the world. And there are things that we could do where we could make an impact.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yes?
I actually work with Chandra. We were just having a discussion.
You're working on search, right?
Search related stuff.
Related stuff.
You have to shoot you to give you more details. So.
Yeah.
So one of the things that is a core tenet of mine, and I believe is Chandra's as well, is that we don't want to be here working on things unless we know that it's going to help people. Technology for technology's sake, and it would be foolish, I think, to ignore that people are interested and will continue to be interested in, maybe even more so, in the spiritual aspects of their lives, as well as just getting information or researching products. So the question that we've got, and one of the reasons I'm here, is the spiritual aspect of individuals. How can we support that and also make things that work for a variety of other things that are much more easy to understand as well.
Okay, good. Yes?
I'm in the search area. And speaking more generally for computing, we do a lot of stuff that relates to the left part of our brain. If people work well with both parts of the brains, and I'm wondering whether we can learn a little bit more about the right side and how it can be used in computing, and certainly in search, we're starting to do some of it. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious about where things will go.
Yeah, yeah. For those who just came in, people are just kind of reporting on what they're doing here at Microsoft, and if you see any connection between that and your and spirituality, or maybe it's some kind of personal interest, kind of what brought you here. Any further comments? Maybe Ed might have some ideas on this topic.
I'm interested broadly in spirituality. I'm actually trained as a neuroscientist, and part of what got me interested in where I first met Craig was actually at a meeting between a bunch of neuroscientists and the Dalai Lama and some other meditation practitioners, sort of trying to understand the neuroscience of meditation and the relationship between those things and what's happening there. And we got into a conversation about the relationship of spirituality and computing. And in general, computing seems to be very much focused on sort of materialism and on these very sort of hard answers. And technology is sort of pervasive in our world today. And I think it's just really important to try to understand a little bit about how they can start to play nice together. And perhaps more to the point of enrich each other in various ways. It's thousands and thousands of years of people thinking about these things, and we can't just ignore that. So that's a lot of my interests.
Yes. Okay. Any further thoughts? Yes.
I'm interested in.
And what do you do here,
my name is Dan, and I'm a designer with a fine art background, working in the research department. And what I'm actually interested in working on, though, is things. Well, not working. What I'm actually interested in engaging in is things that help encourage sort of transcendental experiences. For me, the promise of computing had always been that it would help realize things that were in my head that I had no other way of realizing. And 20 years later, I still haven't gotten to that point. So I went from being a tool user, hoping that the computer would be a great tool, to being a tool builder. And I'm kind of tired of being a tool builder, and I really want to be a maker again.
Mm-hmm. So something about catalyzing your creative design instincts in this realm, right?
Right.
Yeah. Good.
I mean, ideally, I would be able to, hook something up, and you'd be able to see what I see, but we haven't got there yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you can see that this is an open space. What is the interface between spirituality and technology? And I don't have to offer any killer applications in this realm. And I don't think I can point to any single application to epitomize exactly what we're moving towards. But the framework for spiritual computing, which you'll read about a bit in spiritualcomputing.com, suggests that an historical moment has arrived in which, as technology evolves and as the next generation of applications leads to the successive generations of applications, we will move deeper into the realm that has been occupied by spirituality for thousands of years. This is for a number of reasons, which we will talk about today. So I'm more interested in arguing that point to suggest that the convergence is happening. I'm not necessarily saying that that's going to be a good thing, because there's a lot of bad things that could happen as technology invades the realm of spirituality. So it does come down to almost putting us on notice that this is going to happen. Many of you might have read Ray Kurzweil's book, The Age of Spiritual Machines, written in 1999. He's a respected inventor, and he suggested, because of the pace of innovation, it's inevitable that computing will enter the realm of the mind in a very deep way. So, but what will happen in that convergence? That's the core question. And you, sir, was it Dan, who brought up the issue of design? I think the core issue is design. How can the design principles that we're now exploring lead us into the application that can make the best of this convergence? So, to begin the story, I'd like to suggest that there has been some precursors to the current period that gives a hint of what it might mean to bring together technology and spirituality. Yes?
Before that, could you say a couple of words about what got you here?
What got me here? Okay.
Basically reflecting your patient view.
Yeah. Let me postpone that by answering it through my talk, because I'll talk a lot about my own experiences that brought me here. And one of those experiences was going into a darkened theater 30 years ago when Star Wars was being presented to crowded audiences. Now, everyone has seen Star Wars, right? And for me, my experience was somehow awakened in that theater. I felt something unusual going on, something exciting to me. And many other people felt that too, because it became a sustained box office success, that the basis of a whole genre of action films and so forth. But the design principle that shaped Star Wars came from a conversation between George Lucas, who was already being criticized in Hollywood for paying too much attention to the technologies of Hollywood, the new technologies, special effects, and not enough attention to storytelling. But he had a conversation with a man named Joseph Campbell, who had spent 20, 30 years articulating the notion of spiritual journey or spiritual mythology. Essentially, he was saying that embedded in the spiritual, in the incredibly complex and baroque history of American spirituality or global spirituality was certain very simple fundamental principles, like the notion that spirituality is essentially a journey, a learning process, in which one poses basic questions and seeks knowledge, finds knowledge, and then returns back to where you came from. You bring that knowledge back home, so to speak. So spiritual journey was the topic of the conversation with George Lucas. Out of this came a concept like the Force. And it also became a story of how one type of technology, that sword and the R2-D2 and the kind of robotic support that Luke Skywalker had, was deployed to tackle the destructive technologies that he was competing with. So it was a story of good versus evil, one type of technology against another. It was also the story of the empowerment of the protagonist, Luke Skywalker. And we were sitting there in the audience, captivated by this story, because it was also the story of how the human spirit could command the special effects of Hollywood, so that the special effects and the kind of violence that they were capable of demonstrating were subjugated to the larger vision of the triumph of human culture. That was 30 years ago. Now we go 30 years to the present, and we could project 30 years into the future. 30 years later, 2006, we have a situation where the bells and whistles of technology are much, much more sophisticated and pervasive. We have a couple billion people connected to digital networks, certainly within the next couple years. We also have much more than the odd Joseph Campbell who's been thinking about this. We have the great spiritual traditions, the pre-modern spiritual traditions, with their roots in this period sometimes called the Axial Age, between 800 BC and 200 AD. Those were the periods where the founders of the great religions lived and taught. We have academics and other specialists, epistemologists, who have looked at these traditions, including Christianity itself and Islam, and seen that these religions and these spiritual traditions represent a kind of storehouse of knowledge, epistemologies, ways of knowing, ways of accessing experience. And those experiences are being made available to Westerners and even to technologists, even accessible in terms of measurement. So the conference that Ed was referring to with the Mind and Life Institute, after 18 years of informal dialogues with the Dalai Lama, we now have at least 3 major neuroscience labs led by University of Wisconsin's Laboratory for Affective Neuroscience, studying what empowerment actually looks like compared to a less empowered state, and measuring the difference. So as the technology sector begins to embrace the concept of UX, or user experience, and as the term empowering experiences is being bandied about, we now are beginning to see that there actually may be some measures to tell us the difference between empowering experiences and those that are less empowering. So we're not just in a situation where we have the odd George Lucas and the odd Joseph Campbell sitting down. we have the basis for a systematic convergence between these two worlds. So what might be the incentives that the technology sector might be experiencing that will lead them into this kind of flaky realm of spirituality that has been so easy to dismiss and ignore until now? Well, I think there are 5 drivers. One driver is technological innovation itself, the kind of thing that is going on here at Microsoft Research. When Web 2.0 emerged, the notion that users will be increasingly free to self-create their own experiences on the web, it suggested that the competitive advantage of Microsoft depends on delivering quality user experience. So it forces Microsoft, as well as other research divisions of corporations all over the world, to ask really basic questions of what is the nature of experience, how do you get to qualitative experience that could create loyalty among users, and then different lines of research from search to the home-based applications, healthcare, education, artificial intelligence, a whole spectrum of streams of research are finding through their own conceptual pathways reasons to look at first principles or basic ideas about the nature of experience. And I'm going to come back to the divisions of these Web 2.0 applications that lead us into spirituality in just a moment. But second, I'd like to mention the next driver leading technology as a field into spirituality. It is marketing. We know that technological innovation alone doesn't drive what enters the marketplace. Better mousetraps won't necessarily find a market. And just ease of use is not a powerful enough concept to bring users into higher levels of functionality as they move from more basic to more complex functions, and as they become willing to lend their loyalty to particular companies. So how do we approach the issue of marketing? Well, we do know that marketers themselves can't push their notions onto users as they once did. It's not possible, like it was in Windows 95 launch, to get Vista on the cover of Time magazine and get all the supply chain rallied to make this into a news event. We now know that marketers have to somehow enable users to embrace a new idea. So marketers themselves have to be listening to user experience in ways that they didn't. And so what are users up to? Well, we know that 83% of consumers in the United States think of themselves as spiritual. When given questionnaires, they'll check, yes, I'm spiritual. About 1% rises every year. So maybe next year it'll be, 84% and rising. About half of these are religious. And the number of self-defined religious people is declining relative to the spiritual category. So more and more self-defined spiritual people do not feel that they're adequately served. Their spiritual needs are served by religions, and they're looking for secular expressions to vent their need for spirituality. And we only have hints of what this secular market for spiritual learning, if you might call it, is going to look like. We've seen, yoga interest in yoga increased sevenfold in the last 15 years. And some entrepreneurs, such as Bikram Chowdhury in Beverly Hills, has been very brazen in turning that into a franchise model. But for the most part, this spiritual realm is an area of pent-up demand, we could say, where so far marketers have not really looked very closely at who are these spiritual people, how are their needs being met, and where could technology help them. We know that there's a spa industry that's exploding, and spas are interested in delivering qualitative spiritual experience, but that's just a niche market. So in the advanced markets, we really we haven't yet seen an explosion of new kinds of consumer markets in this area. We could not yet label this as a consumer marketing trend. However, if you look a little below the surface of marketing and you look into, say, healthcare systems and educational systems, you can see that ideas are swarming in both healthcare and education that suggest that the empowered user is critical to the new concepts for healthcare as well as education. So in healthcare, for example, we have the notion of integrative health, in which complementary or alternative health is being combined with allopathic conventional health so that the doctor becomes more of a coach, helping the patient become engaged in their own process of cure when they sort out different kinds of treatment modalities and different kinds of experiences that will lead them to health. And we know that one of the most powerful expressions in the healthcare industry has been the self-help movement, the 12-step movement, where something like 60 million people voluntarily outside the market-based system in a voluntary way have gone through a process that begins with some kind of statement of grace where you say, I can't solve this on my own. I have to seek a higher power. And then as you move from the first step to the second step to the 12th step, the elimination of the symptom of addiction becomes secondary. The primary thing is that people have gone through an empowering experience in which they've felt some experience of spiritual renewal. So how can the healthcare system begin to embrace this notion, the ideas of spirituality, integrate them into healthcare? This is probably the low-hanging fruit of spiritual computing. This is where we're probably going to see the first powerful expressions of it in areas like end-of-life care, where science doesn't have a lot of answers to how to help people face their mortality. Spirituality does have a lot of answers, and we're seeing it in changes as the concepts like mindfulness enter the end-of-life domain and enter the nursing professions and so forth. So how mindfulness, the idea that there's actually a way to train your mind, focus it, and become flexible in how you direct your own mind, that it's something you can be trained to do. How that enters the complex equation in healthcare, it's an interesting question that many are now asking. And it's finding its way into technology. Like, for example, there's a video game called Remission, produced by a lab called Hope Lab out of California, in which biofeedback interfaces are presented to children with cancer, and they're given mindfulness training so that they can direct their attention to images on the screen, visual and sound, that actually bring them into their dysfunctioning organs so that they can bring love and and positive energy to the very parts of their bodies that are killing them. The idea that mindfulness could be sort of targeted mindfulness could be coordinated with biofeedback interfaces is really huge. There's many, many new expressions of it. There's another consumer video game called Wild Divine. You might have heard of that. That essentially does the same thing, but it actually teaches meditation through a video game. Then we have the education realm, which of course is vibrantly integrated with technology. And notions of how you get learners to become proactive learners so that they go through a process where they maybe begin with what interests them, entertainment, and then they discover motives for a deeper learning as they go into a learner system. The motivations for deep learning arises through the process of learning, and the learning about a subject and other self-arises with learning about oneself. And how can we create designs for systems that create and support that kind of simultaneous learning about self and other? Turns out that many of the most powerful concepts in the field of learning have come from people who have drawn from spiritual traditions. The idea of emotional intelligence as a kind of learning came from Dan Goleman. He drew it directly from his interactions with the Dalai Lama. The idea of the learning organization, Peter Sangay sold 5 million copies. That was drawn from his experience with Chan Buddhism as well. Buddhism has arrived here only 40 years ago, but it's come with an epistemology, a way of talking, a set of concepts, a way of knowing that has allowed it to be integrated into a number of fields, particularly in the field of education. So we can imagine projecting ahead into education, healthcare, consumer markets, that marketing is going to be an important factor here. A third factor, driving factor, leading us into spiritual computing is management. It's the fact that increasingly managers of technology corporations, in order to capture the creativity and loyalty of their own employees, and in order to somehow crack the code on how you can help your employees become contemplative in solving creative problems and at the same time work effectively in groups, and how you could get these teams that are distributed across the world acting effectively after just a few brief meetings where they might come together twice a year. That dynamic essentially calls for a workforce that has some mind training, that isn't using the workplace as a kind of excuse to structure their lives, but employees that actually have their own vision that's aligned with the vision of the company. So the trends in management kind of point towards workforces that are in sync with spiritual learning itself. And there's even another driving trend, which is finance. At the end of the dot-com bust, it was assumed that the reason why we had the bust is that the market was putting its money on projects that weren't making money. We need to go back to business fundamentals was the mantra coming from Wall Street, so that the future of technology will be those companies that make money. Well, it turned out to be exactly the opposite. The most powerful expressions of the next digital revolution came from companies that had no apparent business model, that didn't require venture capital to start up, but that actually were based on empowering notions of user experience. So when Jimbo Wales created Wikipedia, and he came to a point in his own experience where he said, I don't need to create another damn Encyclopedia Britannica. I think that users can be inspired to self-create their own repository of knowledge, and that wisdom can arise over time. And they will not only use it to pitch their own ideas, but I bet they'll even integrate the ideas of others and do it for no money at all. And everyone said, that's nuts. Users wouldn't do that. That's not what users do. They need economic incentives of some kind. But hey, guess what? Wikipedia created a lot of value, and now they have, so where is their business model? Where is it? Well, they have a little quiet for-profit subsidiary called Wikia that helps other groups create their own versions of Wikipedia for a fee. But they would not undermine the trust that they have in their users who self-create that system. So this is not an idea that needed a lot of venture capital. And when MySpace trumped Friendster, it was not because of the financial dimension of it. It was just because the loyalty factor shifted to MySpace. So how it really becomes a matter of getting the finance guys, the one who actually created the first revolution, out of the way, so that the outrageous ideas like Wikipedia could rise to the surface. So there's a big the cost of entry is lowered. You don't need to have a huge arsenal in your financial arsenal on your behalf. There's so many people who benefited by the first .com revolution that have technology skills and a few $100,000 to invest in something in their own projects, that VC is no longer a factor in driving the next generation of technologies. It's much more about having the personal integration as the designer, where you get how to elicit this capacity of users to find their own empowerment. Empowerment is the driver, not finance. So what have I mentioned? I mentioned technology, marketing, management, finance. There's one more. What would it be? Ethics. Ethics. That's it. Ethics runs all the way through here, all these other factors. You know, it's what this gentleman over here, I'm sorry, your name? Mike? Michael. It's what Michael said. You know, the tools that are in our command, I'm giving myself the benefit of the doubt and saying I'm one of you Microsofties, can do great things or they can do horrific things. Going back to Ray Kurzweil's vision of spiritual machines, guess what? He wasn't talking about spiritual machines at all. He was talking about a world in which the Darth Vaders are going to win. He was talking about how the machines can exceed human intelligence, and at some point the humans will just give in and let the neural nets download their entire system so that they voluntarily become machines, and the human project of facing your fear of death, facing mortality, no longer becomes an issue. We can achieve our immortality as machines. Can you believe it? He gets a good audience because the technology sector has been so isolated from spiritual wisdom that they're willing to buy this as a plausible notion of what a spiritual machine is. If you talk to Joseph Campbell, the guy who interacted with George Lucas, he would say, well, spirituality begins when you realize you don't have much time left, and you have to create meaningful experience between now and that unknown time when you actually die. Because there will be a very predictable moment that comes in which you have to totally let go, totally push off into the big open space. So how do you go through the learning? How do you gain access to the realms of the mind that would allow you to truly let go at the end of your journey? This is what spirituality is fundamentally about. So we have in the technology sector the potential that as Moore's Law takes us into ever-expanding innovation, that we will turn out, we will pervert the whole thing, that the kind of engineer mentality of just, if we can make it, we can do it, and users will come, that mentality might triumph to the point that we lose this opportunity to appropriate technology for the purpose of democratizing spirituality on this planet. So there's a kind of dramatic, critical moment in which a meeting point of true spiritual wisdom can arise together with the best thinking, the most brilliant thinking coming out of technology, now that experience is what it's all about. Because it turns out that experience is also what spirituality is all about. It's a very, the language is different. But is the experience different? Maybe not. That's an open question. When I went to Star Wars that day, I was a young hippie in Berkeley. I'm sort of the classic baby boomer ex-hippie. During that same year, I believe, I went to the Kala Chakra, which was His Holiness the Dalai Lama's event, which you enter a kind of pure sacred space created by a lot of chanting and mantra and so forth, and there's thousands of people, and there's all these horns blowing. You're kind of confused, and there's incense, and you enter the space, and suddenly you're kind of happy, and you let go of the things that were in your mind before, and you feel kind of willing to kind of settle in there, and you develop patience, and you enter a kind of chaos where you're not sure what's going on, but something is opening up, something is being released inside of you as you enter that space. Now maybe I had to bring some of my beliefs into that experience, but this concept of abhisheka in Sanskrit, any of you know Sanskrit? Have you in South Asians here?
A little bit.
What does abhisheka mean?
One meaning could be a ritual offering.
Yeah, I think it's literally like sprinkling of water.
You sprinkle water, milk, ghee,
Yeah.
flowers.
But the idea is that what you're doing is you're transmitting some sense of empowerment. So that a person who let's say a person presides over this experience embodying the principle of compassion, an open heart, and embodying that principle, the person might flick water out. And it's a kind of transmission, the notion that one person could have a certain level of spiritual development which was so developed that it could actually influence the space around that person geographically, and the sprinkling could could affect the experience of those around them. So this is goes back 5,000 years in Indian history, this kind of ritualistic experience. And other religions in their own way have this as well. You could say this is about the notion of creating sacred space. Well, does sacred space, does that have to do with, say, context-aware computing, locative computing, ubiquitous computing, the idea, does that have to do with the home? No? Does that have to do with how to counter information overload? Do we need sacred spaces? Is there any way we can appropriate technology to create our own sacred space? Is that something fundamental to the human experience, that we would want to have sacred space? Could we borrow from this notion, not the literal ritualistic elements, but the function of sacred space? Could that be appropriated some way in the lifestyle of contemporary people? So okay, I've given you the 5 drivers: technology, marketing. I didn't really spell out ethics, but what I mean by ethics is that I think the ethical questions, particularly as we've gotten concepts of ethics from the Greek classic tradition, it's very much like the concept of citizenship. We're born into a situation, and it's how do we bring out the best of our situation? How can we make actions, ethical actions, that not only in which our self-interest is aligned with the larger good, that we could reap destruction or we could reap good. The ethical thing is to do good. But yet we have to work things out in order to be ethical. Now, ethics is, from technology point of view, is a big issue in government relations, like in Microsoft's government relations. Microsoft, in recent years, has brought government officials to Microsoft's campus, to have a dialogue of how to bring technology into emerging markets. Most of those discussions have focused on technology as a productivity tool and how the productivity of government can be enhanced, government bureaus and so forth. So it's pretty much the same old mantra as far as technology as productivity enhancement. But in recent years, Microsoft has begun to broaden its notion of working with the public sphere and brought ethical dimensions into it. And in fact, many governments are needing, to anticipate the ethical impacts of the spreading of digital networks into their countries in order to build a regulatory system that supports this. We've seen in India that the Hindu party, using IT as its trump card, brought India finally into 8% growth rate about 3 or 4 years ago, equal to China's. But it was thrown out in the election. Sonia Gandhi with her Congress party came in. Why? Because she questioned the ethics of India embracing an IT revolution without any kind of framework for how this could help India or how it could support the principles that she was speaking for, which are really Gandhian spiritual principles. So ethics is in the background across the whole ball game here. Unless a company is working hard to bring out the best of this technology for human development, it's going to get caught in a number of ways. So ethics is another one of the drivers. Sir, you had a question? Somebody? Okay. Now I want to actually, yes?
I had a question. You had mentioned going into this sacred space and having a sense of elevation or happiness.
Yes.
How does that compare to the elevation people may feel when they, play a video game or take recreational drugs? Are those also sacred? Are they also spiritual, or are they in a different category?
Okay, yeah. I'd now like to get into that in a kind of sequenced way, because I'd like to actually deal with the common interests of this particular group at Microsoft Research. Yes?
Actually, I would like to say, so there are, when I personally have looked at spiritual issues, the problem is not necessarily that spiritual issues are useful and good. It's that they are often, as a sort of as a result of how we work, how we live, compartmentalized. In other words, it is difficult for me to bring my spiritualism into work because I have this thing to do, which may or may not be in conflict. But the difficulty that I often see is that it's hard to find connective tissue between your spirituality, your spiritualism, your sense of the greater good, and the problems that you have at hand. And to sort of illustrate that point, one of the things that I often tell designers is it's important for you to create a good interface. Yes, it's also important for you to work on the right interface, the right problem set. A good design isn't necessarily something that you see or something that gives you elation. A good design is something that takes your propensity towards road rage down a notch, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, what may I ask? Do you have a spiritual practice?
I do.
Prefer not to say?
I'm essentially a Theravada Buddhist.
Theravada Buddhist. Well, I would point you to a site called sitatwork.org, because it actually explores the topic that you're presenting from the point of view of meditation, like how you integrate it into the workplace. This is developed by someone at Google who started a luncheon group that now has about 80 or 90 people meet every week, and they sit during lunch hour. But a number of those are popping up, and there's a new dialogue happening in the tech sector about how that integration can take place and how management can support that integration.
And that's actually my point, is again that points to this sort of compartmentalization, whereas mindfulness, which some people here may not be really familiar with the term, it's about every day. It's about every moment. So there's a notion in Buddhist teaching about right work, and some people are very concerned that, well, if I'm in sales, is that really right work? Well, right work is not doing the wrong work more than doing the right work.
Mm-hmm.
And if I think that the bigger issue is having some awareness, having that mindfulness ongoing as I'm doing my email, as I'm communicating with my team, as I'm pushing the pixels around or doing the code that I need to do, which are these things that have to be done, but also to bring along the spirituality for that ride. I think that's the sort of, to use the term, holy grail.
Yeah.
Ultimately,
yeah.
Because then there's peace in the process of doing the thing that must be done.
And I think that each of the genuine spiritual traditions has their own pathway into kind of integration between sort of isolated ritualistic practices and everyday life. So the question you're posing is one that's been deeply considered for thousands of years, and which is now being revisited in the secular context around the theme of mindfulness. In particular, I mean, I would refer you to Jon Kabat-Zinn's work, which perhaps you know, in exploring applications of mindfulness in everyday life. So I'd like to talk about the technological innovation piece with this for a minute, and then we can kind of open it up for broader discussion. So, okay, what are we looking at here in the next generation of technologies? There's search concepts. There's gaming. It's a very big factor. There's looking ahead to ubiquitous computing, where sensor networks are distributed around spaces, where we're not talking about the computer as a boxy device anymore. There's different expressions of social computing, different kinds of ways of aggregating collective intelligence. All of these have their own language, their own networks and conferences and so forth, and Microsoft is in the middle of all of them. So I'm just going to very quickly do a little journey across them and just suggest where these initial connecting points might be. For example, in search, of course, search is integral to spirituality. One might say that people historically have gone through process of seeking. They often begin with some kind of moment. It might maybe a born-again moment or a moment of grace of some kind of renunciation, where they may realize that they don't have all the answers. And so they go through seeking. And through the seeking, they begin to realize that the motives that they begin with begin to change, and they find deeper motives. And as they seek, serendipitously, new information arises in the periphery, and they seek a teacher, for example. They seek knowledge. And something similar is going on in the search field, computer search. I was down at the O'Reilly Foo Camp, which was in Sebastopol a couple weeks ago, and I was talking to the executive director of Dig, the computer site Dig, which is a news site. And it's also a search site because people are looking for news that is valuable to them. So out of this conversation with the executive director of Dig, he became very interested in how, he's competing with a number of other search sites looking at news. So he's wondering, how could we move from accessing news to more empowering experiences around news, where you link, where the person interested in one news subject is linked to people who are interested in that same news subject. They become in a dialogue about how to vote on ways to move from thought into action, and even in local communities or on international issues, the next presidential campaign, whatever, to begin to empower people to go from just passive news junkies to being people who actually become engaged in the process of moving from thought into action. So the search business, which has a kind of push-pull aspect to it, where you wander into the news realm or the realm that you're searching for, you begin to go through interaction according to design principles that could lead you into empowerment in some ways. So search and empowerment may be linked eventually. In gaming, another person at this event I was at was from Electronic Arts, which is the gaming developer company. And they are actually interested in this question of how you do Star Wars 30 years later, and actually have immersive multiplayer experiences where where you become Luke Skywalker and you gain the Force. And they don't want this relegated into the serious gaming realm of education and so forth. They want to use all the latest technologies to, particularly as the demographics of gaming changes, it's not just young boys anymore, but much more complex demographic. They're seeing the potential of mass marketing of spiritual gaming. In the area of social computing, there are other concepts about how you bring together who initially just want to meet each other and hook up to having meaningful interchanges with each other, along the lines I suggested with DIG. Finally, as regards context-aware computing, or like the kind of experience of computing in the home, this is where the concept of sacred space is coming back into the picture. We have it's not exactly a video game, but many of you are aware of the Second Life. It's a game. That could be considered perhaps an expression of spiritual computing. It has churches. So people get to reinvent what they would like their churches to be, or what kind of sacred space they would like to create in a virtual reality. Once we get into more locative, geographically based computing, we can also look at how to reinforce sacredness in real-life physical events. A friend of mine is reinventing the experience of the Space Needle, the observation tower. And when you look towards Mount Rainier, he wants to have people wear goggles and see if there some kind of interface could arise in which you not only see the mountain, and maybe he will help eliminate the clouds, you can actually see that mountain, but he wants to be able to convey how the Indians, Chief Sealth and the Indians 300 years ago who lived in the periphery of Mount Rainier might have related to that mountain and gained spiritual sustenance from it. So what could happen through a combination of just visually glimpsing that mountain, say on a beautiful day, and actually having that experience enhanced so that you could see that what you're looking at, or if maybe it was Mount Fuji in Japan, or the Stonehenge in England, how certain places that have been recognized, say, through feng shui principles in China or whatever, have special resonance. How could that experience be appreciated and augmented through all the tools of context-aware computing?
Who was that? That colleague of yours?
Oh, probably I'm not sure I should give his name out, just because I haven't asked him for his permission for that. And I'm not sure what he's actually released to the public on that yet. So now we're talking about 2006, and these are just hints of what's to come. But if you would project, say, into 10 years, you can only imagine that this notion of the next generation of technology as an inner revolution that would open up, that would help lead users beyond this tiny little pattern of cognition that we're familiar with, this kind of left brain oriented cognition, to lead people into familiarity with the depth and breadth of their own mind and opportunities for actually integrate cognitive and affective dimensions of their brain. That would likely be the future of what we're talking about as we look to see the possibilities of computing. So where do we take this? Well, personally, I'm not a techie. I'm not very geeky. I wish I were. I could use those skills now. But I think that different labs around the world can bring different expertise to this question of how to bring about powerful expressions of spiritual computing. So I'm taking the lead in developing something called a spiritual computing research group. And I would love it if there were some Microsoft employees that might be willing to come back into this space in a couple weeks. Say, I think, Ed, we've scheduled an experience.
I've got a roundtable scheduled for 10 a.m. on the 22nd, is that right? I think that's right. Friday
Yeah, that's Friday the 22nd at 10 a.m. So I'd like to see if we couldn't take this conversation and reduce it down into some sort of more solutionable issues and questions that may connect the dots between what you're doing in your work, where it might be moving 3 years out, and to see if we can't begin to create some hypotheses and some research questions around this very broad and diffused concept. So with that, is there any discussion about what I've said? Yes.
A lot of what you've talked about is descriptive, and perhaps this meeting will get into some prescriptive directions. But I was wondering if in your various thinking on the subject, you had anything prescriptive to suggest.
Like what Microsoft should do?
Anyone?
Well, I think that a very important issue is the issue that Ed brought up, which is that brain science is making accessible spiritual experience in ways that are very, very interesting and that have implications for all the areas I'm talking about. So one area would be to get informed about that, to read up on it. There's a wonderful book called Zen and the Brain by a guy named James Austin, former professor of MIT. And then he wrote another book revisiting of that. What he's done is essentially looked at the different functions of Zen and then see how they correspond to brain states. So I think a lot of hypotheses can emerge out of that kind of inquiry. So I would point you to that. But the other thing, prescription, is that there are clusters of people all over the world in different labs who have a genuine interest in this. And I would very much appreciate Microsoft research joining with the collection of people at Yahoo, at Google, at Nokia, at HP and IBM and Apple and the other major labs who for different reasons are also interested in these subjects, so that we could have a vital kind of sharing of information. And in terms, and I would very much like to see spiritualcomputing.com as a point of intersection and communication vehicle between these groups of people. So I need help in designing such a website that could support that in ways that could be embraced by these separate groups. So I'm just right now in a kind of walkabout to different labs, seeing who comes together, who connects with this vision, and then how to put them together. But more prescription than that, I don't know that I could suggest. I do think that it's in the healthcare field where the most immediate expressions are. But India is also geographically a place where the conditions are ripest for this kind of inquiry because of the richness of India's own political situation, and because I mean, because of the political context of India now, and because of the spiritual richness of India. I'm not sure I'm answering your question, but yeah.
So I would like to offer a couple of observations. It's an issue that I think we will run into here at Microsoft, and I think it's an issue that you will run into as well. So spirituality is tied, sometimes in a loose way, to religion. And Microsoft is a global company, and so we cover. Our customers have many religions. There are probably more religions in this one room than we can count on one hand, at least. That is not necessarily what spirituality is about. However, when we start talking in terms of spirituality, different aspects of spirituality can often be in conflict with one religion's rules or concepts. So one of the things that I would suggest is that is prescriptive is to start with the individual. And I'll give you this example. I was sort of unofficially mentoring a young designer who has a similar background to mine. And the thing that I told her was, for this to work, for you to be able to work effectively in this environment, you need to be able to answer the question of, what does my heart need to be? And happiness is not what I'm shooting for here. Contentment. Happiness is too high in emotion. But to be content, to not hate going in, right? What is it that I need to be able to do, whether it's helping people or some sense of self-gratification? It doesn't really make any difference. But understanding the self, I think, is critical. To begin a discussion, a career discussion about that, well, in that way is, I don't think it's novel, but it's what it is doing is begging the question of, what spiritually do you need to bring to the table and take home at the end of the day that will help you feel that you're doing the right kind of thing, that you want to go in, you're eager to go in and solve problems that this company cares about, which ultimately are about making money and helping large numbers of people, broad numbers of people. So one thing that I think we can do that is prescriptive is to take that individual's heart into account when we're having those discussions. The other aspect, though, is I think it will be difficult for large corporations like Microsoft to actively embrace spiritual computing because of the sort of all the other stuff that comes along for the ride with it. That my spirituality is very likely going to be in conflict with somebody else's idea of what spirituality is. What works for me won't work for John necessarily. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is the trouble, is you're dealing with global solutions that have very, very specific individual needs, person to person. So India has a lot of people, but all these people have different spiritual needs. That's really the problem, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, it kind of reminds me of like the gay issue at Microsoft. You know, corporate management said, you know, we're not going to weigh into that. You know, that's not that will just get us into hot water. Well, it turns out that they had to struggle and find their way into that as a diversity issue. The S word is kind of in the closet in the corporate world. It's hidden in back of words like affective, but sooner or later, the fact that this is a realm of expertise where deep knowledge of experience lies, that has to surface. So we do have historical figures like Gandhi, for example, who have taken the Indian spiritual tradition and reduced it to some principles. We have neuroscience now that is giving us some measures to look at diverse spiritualities as a set of methods. So we have ways of transcending the discomfort that one encounters when entering a totally new domain such as spirituality and sorting it out. You know, if there were any way I could personally avoid using the S word myself, I would do it. But the truth is that, you know, when Ray Kurzweil named his book The Age of Spiritual Machines, he knew that technology was bringing us into a realm that could only be called spiritual because it had to do with encountering the depths of experience. So corporate management has to come to terms with this. The word mindfulness was carefully chosen by those who were trying to find some euphemism for spirituality. I think that as different labs come together around this rubric, and as different religions begin to buy into a framework for looking at their experience, I think there's a way of actually addressing this from a management point of view. Yeah, Ed?
I just wanted to say two things before everybody has to go away completely. If you're interested in attending this thing that's in a couple of weeks, send me some mail. It's just CUTRELL, and then I'll send the invite out. That was the first thing. The second thing is that you know, we've been a party at least of some conversations about this for a little while, and I mean, my view is that you got to at some point use the S word, because spirituality is what it is, and it means lots of different things to different people. And you can use various euphemisms like meaning or meaningfulness or things like that. But inevitably, they all still mean different things to different people. And I don't know, I think that what's going to happen is that as different, I mean, right now, I really don't feel like I've got a good handle on what this is, sort of writ broadly. From a prescriptive sense, you know, I don't really know. I mean, I think that there are some things there. I think that there are clearly some places where, you know, the idea of encouragement of sacred space or things like that in design and in even in some applications, probably likely. I think actually something that's maybe strong that Craig didn't talk about there is in the grouping together of many people in social computing type situations where you have literally millions of people all networked together, and many people are finding each other in nice ways. And some very simple things, it just has to do with information transmission. But, you know, these are, I think, I don't really know what this is, but,
yeah.
I still think that spirituality as a catchword or whatever we want to use is as good as I could come up with anyway.
I've used the term, and I was very aware that I was borrowing from sort of Western psychology, but promoting a path towards self-actualization, and really for me, that's what spirituality is this integration of the most important aspects of my life. And you know, at Microsoft we have this notion of work-life balance, and which is paid a lot of lip service, but in matter of fact, it's not something that's actually, you don't get rewarded for going home on time. So, you know, but part of that work-life balance is making sure that if you want to be on a path like that, if you want to be on a path towards self-actualization, that's something that works with the way you work and the kind of work that you choose to do.
Anything else? I just think we should probably wrap up because it's about 3.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greg.